Hi, I'm Eric Rivette, Chief Curator of the Western Reserve Historical Society, and today we're going to talk about James Garfield, 20th President of the United States, and unlike William Henry Harrison, one who was in fact born in a log cabin. He was born in 1831 in Orange Township, what is now known as Moreland Hills. So here's a young James Garfield. Now he grew up in really abject poverty. In fact, he was probably the poorest man ever to become President of the United States. His father died when he was very young, only about a year and a half or 2 years old, and so his mother really struggled to provide a life and security for the Garfield family. He worked a variety of jobs. He's probably most famous for having been what's called a mule skinner on the canal system, which meant he was responsible for caring for the mules that pulled the canal boats along the canal. Finally, after his hard work and hard work on the part of his mother, they scrounged enough money for him to go to school. And that's where it was discovered that he was really a brilliant student. He could master any subject you put before him. In fact, he was so good, while still a student, he started teaching subjects. One of his, a party trick that he was known for is that you could ask him a question and he would write the answer to the question in Greek with one hand and Latin in the other hand at the same time. So I guess that was a lot of fun back then. But he attended Hiram College for a couple of years. Then he graduated from Williams College in Massachusetts before coming back to Ohio and teaching several subjects, including languages, history, mathematics, again at Hiram College. And it was there that he met a young woman named Lucretia. In fact, he was one of her tutors, who would eventually become his wife. So at the age of 26, only 26, Garfield became president of Hiram College. But he decided that education was probably not the career path for him. He had also by this time had a religious epiphany and become an ordained minister. He was a lawyer, and in 1859 he was elected to the state senate, which he served until the start of the Civil War. So he was really a jack of all trades, but he could master most of them. So, like so many men his age, he was pulled into the Civil War. So let's take a look at Garfield during the Civil War. So like many men, Garfield was eager to serve in the military, but he was convinced to remain in the legislature for several months after the war broke out to help get Ohio on a war footing. So he helped with recruitment, procurement of supplies, uniforms, muskets. Finally, in August 1861, he was allowed to leave the Senate and go into the military. So he raised and commanded the 42nd Ohio Volunteer Infantry as its colonel and served in several battles, probably the largest being Shiloh, which put him under the command of another famous Ohioan who was on his way up the line, which was Ulysses S. Grant. So like so many things he did, Garfield excelled in the military. He quickly rose to the ranks. He became the chief of staff to yet another Ohioan, William Rosecrans, who commanded the Army of the Cumberland. He went on to serve in several other key battles in the Western Theater, including Chickamauga, Missionary Ridge, and he was eventually raised to the rank of major, which at that time he was the youngest major general in the U.S. Army. But he did not finish the war in the military. In fact, he was approached in 1862 to run for Congress. He didn't actually run because there was war on. Nevertheless, he allowed himself to be put forward, and so he was elected to the House of Representatives late in 1862, but he didn't take office until 1863. So next, let's take a look at Garfield as a member of Congress. So Garfield serves in the House for 17 years. He's in Congress for quite a long time. And when he first takes office in 1863, he's considered to be really one of the most radical of the radical Republicans, which is that faction of the Republican Party that really wants to punish the South for the Civil War. As time goes on, his views moderate. And by 1880, when Rutherford B. Hayes is getting out of office and the Republican Party is looking for a new candidate, he is considered someone that really all factions of the Republican Party can get behind. And that will be very important because in 1880, he's actually elected to the Senate, but before he can take office, the Republican National Convention meets to settle their next candidate for the presidency. And the Republican Party at this time is so fractured over an issue called the spoils system, which we'll talk about here in just a minute, that they have a very hard time running a candidate, deciding on a candidate. As you can see in this image, Ulysses S. Grant is considering a third term, but he can't get enough support. And so they go over and over and over on ballots trying to find a candidate. And on the 36th ballot, James Garfield is finally nominated by the Republican Party. He is a moderate pro-civil service candidate. So to balance the ticket and get all Republicans on board, they decide to run as his vice president, Chester Arthur, who is really the poster boy for the spoils system. And that's going to have really a disastrous effect on Garfield. So let's take a look at the spoils system and what that did to Garfield. In the election of 1880, Garfield runs against Winfield Scott Hancock, who's a Civil War general, one of the heroes of the Battle of Gettysburg, and it's an extremely close vote. In fact, in terms of the popular vote, out of more than 9 million votes cast, Garfield won the popular vote by less than 2,000 votes. But he had a handy lead in the Electoral College, and so he wins the election. He takes office in 1881. He starts to build a cabinet, starts to do all of the things that a new president would do. He also starts to put into place what his plan for civil service reform. So very quickly, let's go over the spoils system. The way the federal government worked at this time is, let's say you are running for office and I do something for your campaign. I print flyers, I give speeches on your behalf, whatever. You get elected. Because I helped you get elected, therefore I can expect that you will reward me with a job in the federal government. That's the spoils system. That is what Garfield was trying to correct with civil service reform. All of his plans came crashing down in July of 1861, when he's been in office barely 6 months, because of the man you see on the screen here. His name is Charles Guiteau, and I expect probably every historian out there would agree that he is mentally deranged, and it's hard to argue against that. He is a pro-spoils system. He did a few things during Garfield's campaign. He printed some flyers. Garfield gets elected. And so to Guiteau's mind, he then deserves a job in the federal government. What job do you think Guiteau wanted, you ask? He wanted to be the ambassador to the Austrian Empire. Not surprisingly, Garfield kind of brushed him off. Of course, he's not going to get that job. And so this is Guiteau's thinking. If Guiteau were to assassinate Garfield, then Chester Arthur would become president. Chester Arthur is pro-spoils. Moreover, when he becomes president, Arthur will get a raise. And Arthur will be so grateful to Guiteau for making him president and for getting him a raise that Arthur will give Guiteau the job he thinks he's entitled to. And that's why in July 1881, as Garfield is walking through a train station, Guiteau walked up behind him and shot him twice. Once in the arm, once in the back. The wound to the arm is superficial. It's really nothing to worry about. The wound in the back was much more serious. He probably could have survived had his doctors done even rudimentary proper care. They probed the wound with dirty hands. They stuck their fingers in the wound. They did everything that modern medicine would tell you you shouldn't do. And so Garfield basically lingered in agony for several months. He kind of wasted away. If you see photos of Garfield as a robust young man, he lost something like 80, 85 pounds in the last months of his life and basically suffered in agony until September of 1881 when he finally died of his wound. So what happened to Guiteau? He was put on trial. His defense was, all I did was shoot him. The doctors killed him, which was a surprisingly sound defense given his mental state. But he was convicted of the murder and he was sentenced to hang. He danced his way up the steps to the gallows, and then he was allowed to recite a poem that he had written about himself and the assassination. And so that, unfortunately, is Garfield's presidency. As I mentioned before, I think he's the greatest president we never got to have. You know, if you look back at his life and look at a man who had risen from nothing, I mean, almost truly nothing, to become president of the United States and everything else he had accomplished along the way, it's really interesting to ponder what he could have done had he lived and served his term in the White House. So once again, we'll take a look at presidential first, last, and only. We talked about this very briefly early on, but he is our first ambidextrous president. He could write with his left and right hand in Greek and Latin, you name it, he could do it all. Once again, going on the idea that he grew up in poverty, he is the last U.S. president ever to be born in a log cabin. And so far, at least, he is the only U.S. president that has also been an ordained minister. So that's a quick look at the life of James Garfield. Again, just a fascinating man. Next time, we're going to take a look at Benjamin Harrison, grandson of William Henry Harrison. And this video might be short because he is considered to be one of a line of what are known as the do-nothing presidents. So, as always, thanks for joining me. And until next time, stay tuned and stay safe. Thank you.